So having your questions is very helpful because otherwise I have to think of something to say. Which, if you ask my kids, I always have something to say. But
Yeah.
that's not always the truth. So
Yeah. Well, so before I hit record, we were just talking about wounds and how they can show up and how they can be unexpected in the moment. I always go, oh, that's getting poked, and understanding, like I wanted to put a label on it, which was partially true, but the real label was different. And so let's talk a little bit until we get some questions about how do
sure.
we learn to identify, when a wound is flaring. So here's what happened. Like there was something happening, but my pain was more than the situation would have called
Mm,
for, shall we say. So
yeah. So I'll give you an example. So I was preparing for a men's retreat a couple of weeks ago, and in the past, I've gone to a certain hardware store and asked them to cut the wood that I need, and they have done it. So I go there, it's like 8:30 at night, so it's not super late. I go get the wood and then I go stand by the wood cutting area, and there's nobody around and there's no button to push either. So I called the front desk on my phone and asked if somebody could go to the back to help me. And they said, oh, yeah, somebody will be there in a minute. And so I wait there for about 5 minutes. Nobody comes. So I walk up to the front and say, hey, I'm at the wood cutting area. Can you please help me? And they say, oh, yeah, we'll send somebody there. I wait for another 5 minutes. I call the front desk on my phone again. Nobody comes. Go up to the front. And they're like, oh, yeah, somebody be there. So 45 minutes later, somebody finally comes. And then I said, well, I just need these boards to be cut into 12-inch pieces, please. And he's like, oh, we don't do that. I'm like, what do you mean you don't do that? He's like, yeah, we don't do that anymore. All we do is cut it so that it can fit in the back of your truck. And I'm like, well, if I needed a shorter piece, I could have gone over there and picked a shorter piece of wood. Like, I don't know. I don't understand. You don't cut the wood? And he's like, no, we don't do that anymore. I'm like, you've done it in the past. And he's like, no, no. And I could just feel myself being more and more angry. I was so angry. I think partly because I had been waiting there and then just like, I'm so sorry, but is there other things we could do? Like nothing. So by the time I was out of there, I didn't behave inappropriately, but I was so mad. And I tried to call the hotline number to file a complaint, but their office was closed because I was on the East Coast. But I was so mad, and I'm like, okay, what is going on with me? This is not about wood. And that's that the question that you asked is, how do you know a wound's being poked? Well, I knew a wound was being poked because of the amount of energy that was just waving off of me. I was like, what is going on here? And I recognized that there were some wounds of betrayal, some wounds of abandonment. Like I was feeling really abandoned and not really, and I was like, okay, this is not about wood. This is not about this company. They change their policy. This is something deeper. And I had to sit with that, call a friend, work through it, and not recognize like that this is hitting something really deep because seriously, it's not that big a deal. I have a saw at home. I could have just cut it myself. And that's what I did. So it was something deeper. And that's how I knew, oh, this is a wound based on that massive amount of energy that was being attached.
yes, and that was what was for me. And I didn't want to continue to stay dysregulated like you too. Like you're going like I had to sit with this for a moment, and I was like I need to not stay dysregulated because that's how I was feeling, and energy out and energy big and hurt. And so I was willing to look at it and go through my workbook and think about it. Okay, so first question, how long may it take my husband to clear porn addiction from his mind and respond to my body sexually? That's such a it depends question,
but
isn't it?
it is, I mean, there's so many different places that I can go, and we don't have enough information to for me to understand exactly like what's happening in the relationship. So it will take, it can take anywhere from 1 to 4 years of working through the brain stuff to kind of clear out those things. But I will tell you, I was exposed to porn when I was 5 years old, and I can still today very accurately tell you what I saw when I was 5. So to clear your porn, like, I don't know if that's a possibility, but what is a possibility is learning how to be present and learning how to be in this moment with you. And when thoughts come, being able to have learned how to like push them away and be present. And that does take some time and more practice, really. It's about being mindful. I remember when I was talking to a therapist, and we were working through some of the images that would flash in my mind, and he would say, well, why are you bringing that person into your bed? Like, what's going on with that? And it made me start to think, okay, what's happening that's interfering with my ability to be present with my partner? So um, there's not a cut and dry answer to your question, but it um, it's all about the mindfulness and being present. Now, if there's things happening, like if there's not arousal happening, that can happen. There's porn induced uh, erectile dysfunction that does happen for a lot of people, where they have to look at porn in order to have an erection. That will eventually go away if they're doing other things to help them be mindful and present and all those kind of things. But you might need, so he might, your partner, your husband might need some coaching or some help with that, because that does happen to a lot of people. So I wish I wish I could give you better answers, but based on the minimal information that I have, that's the best I got.
Well, and I like you're right, minimal information. To me, it's like how long since he stopped looking at porn. And I'm going to include non-porn porn. Lots of people use, TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all kinds of other, exciting movies, whatever. Like, so making sure that all of those things, have been cleared out. What, recovery actions are being taken? How much time has it been since, discovery and a change? We talk about 90 12-step meetings in 90 days. That's a great starting point. Not enough, but it's a good, it's a good starting point. So a lot of this is what recovery actions is your husband taking that will start to do things to change, because just not looking at porn is just abstinence. It's not, I always say it's, we're just not doing the things we weren't supposed to be doing in the first place. So it's, we have to start doing things like Troy was saying, with intention to move in a different direction. And doing recovery work will help to be mindful and to be present and all of those things. Those are learned skills and take time. But if we are intentional about the actions, we get the benefits of that as well. There's a lot of fear, and I hear this, often with both partners, but often for the addict partner who has been, as Troy was talking about, using porn or using substances or whatever, and so they're a little checked out. And so now to be fully present and vulnerable with a partner, can be very terrifying. And so to just own that and go, yeah, I'm scared and I'm committed to the relationship and really want to do things differently. The other thing with porn is it's 1,000 different new images, and like, as spouses, and they've been there, done that, seen that. And so that stimulation of the different, that's, you can't get that in a real person. And that's the difference. Porn is not real. So, but the difference in the connection of vulnerability and true connection versus just images and intensity, that's a huge difference, and but can have some scary points with it too. Okay, next one. I'm an addict, 5 years into recovery, but just recently starting on attachment wounds. I've had a hard time linking my addictive behaviors to my wounds in a practical way. I can see how they relate, but I'm not sure what to do about it. What comes next at the stage? I wish you were in Troy's attachment wound work group. He'll start another one after the first of the year, but that's practical ways to do it. So what you got,
Yeah.
Troy?
Okay. So let's take a look at the wounds first. Okay. So these are the 6 attachment wounds. And then let's look at the opposite of those. So the opposite of loss is gain for most people. But when we're talking about attachment, that's not possible. For example, I was really close to my grandmother and she died. And so the opposite of loss would be to dig her out of the grave and bring her back. And unless I want to be Norman Bates, that's not going to happen.
That's
So,
creepy. Yes.
right. So the opposite of loss is for attachment is comfort. Like it's comforting and some reassurance that things are going to be okay, even though grandma died. The opposite of neglect is attention, having somebody pay attention to me. The opposite of rejection is acceptance. The opposite of abandonment is presence. The opposite of betrayal is trust. And then the opposite of abuse is compassion and respect for boundaries. Okay, so when I started in recovery, one of the things that often happens is that our addiction shifts and moves to something else. And so I wouldn't say I'm addicted, but I do struggle with food. And when I notice that one of my wounds is being hit, I notice that I have a craving for a certain fast food hamburger place. All right, so let me walk down this list and how in acting out these wounds, it's my attempt to get some of the needs met from these wounds in a way that never works, right? So your question is, I can see how they link a little bit, but how do I do this in a practical way? So I'm having a hard day. Work has been really tough. Maybe some rejection's been poked, or my favorite wound of all time is abandonment. That's my biggest one, right? And so I'm feeling this painful feeling, and then I'm driving down the road, and it's only like 2 blocks from my house. There is this restaurant, and I know what I'm gonna get. They've changed their menu recently, so now it's a number 2 with bacon with a large Coke Zero. Okay, so what does that do? Well, it gives me reassurance. The moment I take a sip of that soda, oh, like so great. And then it's paying attention to me. Like I've got some assurance now and attention. Like they actually say hello and they ask me what I want and they give me attention, and then the food is paying attention to me, is right there, and then it accepts me. They accept my money, and then I feel accepted by this hamburger, and it's really great. And there's presence. In fact, there are 3 of these restaurants in my community, and they're all within 2 or 3 miles from where I am at any time. So I can go there and get it anytime. And I can trust that if I order a number 2 here or there or anywhere, it's going to be the same, right? So I can trust that. The only thing it really doesn't do is compassion and respect for boundaries. But I got 5 out of 6, right? And then afterwards, I eat all that and I feel like crap. And my shame shows up, and my judge says, "Why did you do that? You're trying to lose weight, you loser, you shouldn't have done that," and all that kind of stuff. So I feel that shame. But that was my attempt to get them met. So how do you take care of these in a practical way? Well, where can I go get some assurance in a way that is not counterfeit, in a way that afterwards I don't feel ashamed that I got assurance? Where can I go get some attention in a way that afterwards I don't feel ashamed? Where can I get acceptance. Where can I get somebody to show up for me? Which is why we have 12-step reason. That's why we have drop-in groups. That's why we encourage you to have a sponsors, why we encourage you to have accountability partners. It's why we encourage you to improve your relationship with your partner, so I can reach out, because the way that we heal attachment wounds is through connection. And so now when I'm having a hard time, I'll call somebody, which is still, even I've been doing this for 25 years, it's still hard for me to be vulnerable, but I'll call somebody and I'll say, hey, I've had a really hard day. Can you listen? And then the person pays attention and the person's like, yeah, I got the time. Like, and they hold space for me, and they show up. And so that's how you can relate to it. So what's the wound? What is the need? And then how can I get that need met in a way that actually does not perpetuate shame?
So let's play this out. You phone a friend and the friend goes, I don't have time right now. What do you do?
Oh, well, then my impotent one says, see, I don't know why you bothered calling anybody. No one's showing up. And then I'm like, okay, wait, they're busy, so let me try the next person. That's why I got a call list. I got like 10 people on here. I can call the next person. I can reach to my higher power. I can write a journal entry to myself. I can go walk the dog. Like, there's other things I can do to connect with nature, connect with higher power, connect with the world. There, I don't have to get sucked into the impotent one saying, well, see, you tried once, so and that didn't work out, so I don't know why you bother.
Thank you. Because I was like, if all of my hope is on one person answering a call, and if they're like a busy person or they just happen to be like unavailable in that moment, like like you, I have to have a bigger plan than that. Like I want the security of that. So, okay. So the next question, and it's two. Okay, here's my question. I've done some work on wounds and forget the process. What is a good step-by-step process to undertake at that time so I can respond instead of react? It usually starts with, how am I feeling right now? When is the earliest time I felt the feeling I can remember? What was going on the first time that triggered this feeling?
So I will put a link that we have in the drop-in group, a link for Fridays, that has the finding peace worksheet. It's what I use on, I know if you're a woman, you don't get to go there, but it's what I use to walk people through the healing seat. But anybody can use it. It's really an opportunity to do just some journaling. And so if you use that, it walks you through that process. It's pretty self-explanatory, and it's a way, like, at the end of the night or whatever, you could just journal that. If you had, like, for example, with me and the experience at the hardware store, if I hadn't been doing this for a while and needed some help with that, I could have just pulled out the finding peace worksheet and walked through that and said, okay, so what are the facts? So the facts are the person didn't show up for 45 minutes, and then um they refused to help me with cutting the wood. That's the facts. So, and then what wound was that? That was abandonment. And so you just walking through that really quickly. And so I'm going to put that in the chat for everybody if you want to go check that out.
Okay, next question is, do you have or know any resources for understanding betraying partners who are potentially neurodivergent? I am the betrayed partner, and things have not added up as far as the amount of shame my spouse experiences and what I know he has done, which from my understanding is very minimal. The biggest thing to me is lying for many years about it. I'm not looking for a diagnosis for my partner, but I would like to learn more to see if there are ways to communicate or set boundaries in ways that are less threatening for someone who is neurodivergent. I'm going to pull, because Candace Christiansen is actually excellent. Like, that's all of her work. And so I'm going to pull her website and put it in the chat. But I just want to let you know I'm going to be doing that while you respond.
Thank you. So the thing with neurodivergence is there's a lot of diversity in neurodivergency. So So it, obviously, I don't know the specifics of your situation. Um, if your partner is not feeling a lot of shame, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Shame doesn't really change behavior. Shame just tells us that I'm a piece of crap. So if your partner does have the ability to understand that what this does hurts you or hurts them, and they don't want to do that anymore, they can do that without having to battle the shame. They can figure out how to do that. You've identified that there's a lot of lying going on. So if there's not a lot of shame, there is still probably a ton of fear, probably fear of being rejected or abandoned or those kind of wounds happening. And so they lie to um, prevent that from happening, which doesn't work out that well because then betrayal happens. But that that is part of that situation of being able to understand, like, there's probably some emotions, and if they are neurodivergent, again, there's diversity in that. They may also struggle with being able to convey how they feel. They may have a hard time understanding what their emotions are. So it might, I mean, I'm glad that Tammy's giving you the resource there. It might be helpful to find somebody who does know how to work in that area. Not even about sex addiction per se, but knowing how to help somebody build relationships around neurodivergency and what that looks like. So hopefully that's helpful. And please.
Yeah, well, and Candace is, she is a very good resource. Our team has actually trained with her because we have a number of clients who come to us who are both sex addicts and on the spectrum for neurodivergence, and understanding, just like Troy was saying, like it isn't like, oh, you just do this. It's like you have got to understand. And that's true, honestly, with addicts too. I mean, there are some very, like having a relapse prevention plan. I mean, there's some certain things that really like are universally true, but it still is one of those, how do we communicate? How do we set boundaries? And how to like all of those things, if the goal, I say this all the time, if the goal is to connect in a deeper way, then yes, doing the things that will give us the best opportunity for success, makes sense. So yeah, check out her work. I think she's got a book, on Amazon as well. I think I saw that on the website, that may be useful for you. But at the end of the day, we've had clients with, massive ADHD, and it doesn't give us an excuse to not be in recovery and learn to do recovery things. We just have to use the tools that will help us do it successfully, given those, co-occurring, situations. So okay. Avoidant SAPA husband is real great at talking recovery language. He talks good game about concepts, but won't have real conversations about what he's done or the damage he's caused. He knows all the language to use. We had partial discovery, but no movement towards disclosure or actual work. Avoid, avoid, avoid. I'm losing patience. I hear you.
Of course you are. I think Stephen R. Covey said that you can't talk yourself out of a problem that you've behaved yourself into. So we really need to be able to see behavior. Words don't matter.
Mhm.
There's a song that says, "I know you're lying because your lips are moving."
Exactly.
It's I need to see behavior, and if there isn't behavior, then there's hopefully you're getting some support for you on how to have boundaries for yourself, to know that this isn't the reflection of your worth, to be able to use some of the drop-in groups that we have for the partners, or we Tonglen, or all those kind of things, so that you're not alone in this situation. But yeah, of course you would be losing your patience. It's frustrating.
Yeah, and I was like around 12 step, we say talk the talk, not walk the walk. And that's what I hear you saying. He's doing talking the talk and not walking the walk. And if you're really in recovery, you want to walk the walk because you get all the benefits of recovery. You know, it's not that false facade of like, I look good, I have all the language, I can say all these things. So yeah, lips moving doesn't help. It really is actions. So, but I'm going to flip it to you. It's like healthy boundaries for you. Like, you know, we have the betrayed partner work group. We have the empowered women's retreat coming up in January. We talk a lot about internal and external boundaries. And one more thing that we have coming up, I don't have it scheduled yet, so don't go look yet. But Debbie McCrae is going to be doing a work group on boundaries, because that is such a challenging point for partners. And we may do one for addicts at some point too, but the initial group will be about, you know, internal boundaries and external boundaries for, you know, partners, and how do we set them? You know, what is the consequence? You know, she talks often about what, you know, well, I set a boundary, you know, and da 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 da, but it was never communicated. It was never communicated what the consequence was. Well, then it's not a boundary. It's just like, this is what I want, but nobody, you know, nobody's reading your mind to know that. So there are more tools coming to consider, but at the end of the day, at some point for you, like you're losing patience, like, and it's okay to say, you know, this is, I vision a relationship with you. You know, I'm hopeful of these things and we're stuck. And so here's what I'm looking for. And if you're doing these things, then I'm going to be able to move closer towards you. And if you're not, I'm going to be with my tribe of people over here taking care of me, because I'm the only one that can take care of me. And so you can say it in a, you know, not you need to do this way, but still prioritize you regardless of what your addict is doing or not doing. Lots of resources. Debbie Allen did a 3-circle plan in June of 2023 for partners, and sometimes having the focus of what the addict is doing or not doing, you know, can be inner circle things. And avoidant, you know, yeah, attachment styles, understanding those, but again, they're not excuses for not doing the work. So okay, we have been separated for 5 years due to a conviction for luring a minor. I don't believe he has done any work, but has just started with a CSAT. Do you think people deserve second chances? I got an STD in 2014, which I forgave him for, and he tells me he has been acting out in the marriage since 2013. So I guess this is a third chance. So
Well, I don't believe anybody deserves anything for anything. So just so you know, the word deserve has a entitlement to it. I do believe that people can change, and I do believe that if you want to give a second or third chance, that's up to you, but it's not an expectation. So going to a CSAT would be a good idea. It depends, because if there's like pedophilia going on, that's a higher level of sex addiction therapists are not pedophilia therapists. I mean, there's definitely some overlap, but there's some things that are different. So going to a qualified therapist who can then point him in the right direction would be a really, really good place to go, regardless of what happens in the relationship with you. So there's, and Tammy and I have talked about this before. There's a difference between forgiveness and pardoning. A lot of times people think that forgiveness means to pardon. It's kind of like the governor pardoning somebody and cutting out their sentence, but that's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is, I'm going to give away the anger and the anguish and the resentment that I feel because of someone's behavior. I'm going to give that away, and I'm not going to carry that anymore. That does not mean that I'm not going to have boundaries. That does not mean like that if, for example, if somebody in my family had been convicted of being a sex offender, that I would be letting them hang around with my kids unprotected. Like, so there's boundaries that I'm going to have. The difference is that I still care about that person, and I don't have resentment because I've worked through that, but I'm definitely not forgetting that this is something, and I need, I need a lot of showing of trust before I'm gonna really extend anything to trust. Man, I'm talking all over my words today. But so does he deserve it? Nobody deserves nothing. Can you have boundaries? Yes. I'm hoping that you're working through some of this with a therapist for yourself, because that's a lot of betrayal going on right there. And hoping that you're able to be in a place where you are doing self-care and self-love for you.
And I'm going to speak to the CSATs are certified sex addiction therapists. Most are not co certified for sex offender work. So I'm not saying that the person isn't qualified. I'm just saying I just want you to be clear. And I just was sharing with somebody earlier today. It's like I love math, but like the Venn diagram, there's addicts and offenders, and there's that intersection. And there are some offenders who can be treated with sex addiction work successfully. And then there are some that are dedicated offenders that that are not. So but I'm with Troy. It's like I can still care about a person. That does not mean I need to be in close proximity to them. I absolutely would need to see, because just seeing, even if you're working with Troy and that's the only thing you're doing, that's not enough. Like, this is a 24/7 issue. This is, he said he's been acting out in the marriage since 2013. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot more, depending on his age. Usually these behaviors have a root in, before age 10. So there's probably a lot more. Um, and that matters on some level, and it doesn't, because right now, if you are back in contact with this person, what are you doing to make sure that you are taking care of you and you are safe? And so, yeah, I'm sorry about the STD, and unfortunately, that's a pretty common thing, for partners. Even if someone says, well, he's only been looking at porn, I suggest that they go get an STD test, because oftentimes that's not the case. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm glad you're taking care of your health and from that standpoint. And I'm going to just encourage you to hold healthy boundaries so that you are okay regardless of what he is doing or not doing. So okay, can you also address fantasy and addiction to, in addition to porn? Not addiction, but I don't hear a lot of talk about how fantasy and euphoric recall damage the intimate relationship. But this is a primary issue for my husband. He has been stuck on one kind of specific fantasy since he was 12 years old. Is this the realm of sex therapist to address, or can he expand the arousal template by working with a CSAT? Dr. Rob actually talked about fantasy on a webinar not too long ago, and Aaron too. So, but please, like, this happens often.
Yeah, so the answer to the second question is yes. You could do it through sex therapist or CSAT. The fantasy and how it affects the relationship is that I am wanting to be somewhere other than reality. And I'll try not to be too triggering, but I've had several clients who they have a fantasy that there's two women who are interested in them. That's not reality. And when they play out their fantasy, like, it's really not reality. But we start to take a look at it from an attachment wound perspective. And one of the wounds that the guy has is a deep sense of rejection. So I'm curious what was going on with this 12-year-old little boy that wounded him. And then the fantasy, whether that was maybe an abuse situation that happened, or even just the fantasy of that, is tied to that wound. And the problem with the fantasy is it the belief is that if this happened, for example, if two women really wanted me, that would absolutely prove that I was enough. That would absolutely prove that I was worthwhile. And so they get stuck in there, and then they keep playing out the fantasy, or looking at arousal images that play out that fantasy, because of the belief that that will prove it, but it doesn't. Like, it doesn't prove nothing. So being able to look at some of the underlying wounds, the underlying core beliefs that go along with that fantasy, there's articles that are written like, what does that fantasy say about what's going on with me? It's almost like same as like dream interpretation, which I know is cosmic woo for people, but when we're looking at trauma and people keep having these dreams over and over, we look at, okay, well, what's the meaning behind it? What are the common things that show up in it, and what does that mean around that? And because it's not really about the fantasy, it's about trying to be out of reality. So when you think about that, how does that affect you in like in a sexual or an intimate relationship? Well, if I'm not in reality, I'm not here with you, I'm somewhere else, I can't hold space, I can't be here with you, I can't be open and vulnerable with you, and you're going to pick up on that, and it's going to affect the ability to be vulnerable and real because I'm not in reality.
I, I think what you were talking about earlier with being present, and being mindful is so important. With this question, it doesn't say how long this person has been, has stopped looking at porn, and it does. There can be progress if we are really intentional, we can. But yeah, the fantasy, it is a challenge because that euphoric recall, and other than a partner may go, that person doesn't feel like they're really present, but it isn't, it's different than I'm engaging, a transactional sex act, with a sex worker, that's different than like this could be happening at any time. And I've had partners express that like while they are being sexually intimate with their partner, they can feel a shift. So being able to, say, hey, are you here with me right now, or whatever, or having the addict partner be able to say, hey, I need a second. It's awkward, it's all different, but you're looking to do life differently. The more your addict partner is working towards recovery, like the 3 second with looking, that can be a very similar technique that can be employed with fantasy. Oh, I'm starting to wander away. Making sure content, I talked about non-porn, making sure that I'm shifting things so that I'm being very intentional about the things that are helpful for me. It all helps. But like Troy said, he still remembers from 5 years old, so it doesn't go away. One more thing on the CSAT or sex therapist, well, not like IICS. I do recommend the sex therapist from that group because they have been trained with addiction. Not everybody is. There's another organization that they are a little more militant, shall I say, about anything goes kind of thing. And so making sure that any people you're working with get both aspects of it would be helpful, so that you're not ignoring, oh, we're just going to talk about the sex therapy part and ignore that this person is an addict, or vice versa. So okay, next one. Betrayed wife, married 33 years, husband had an emotional affair 22 years ago, and limerence emotional and physical affair in 2022. How can I heal my attachment wound if my husband has difficulty empathizing with me and his defensiveness is a trigger for me? He has tools from various sources for developing empathy, but admits he is not able to translate to practice what makes me feel unsupported in my healing, or which makes me feel unsupported in my healing.
So there's a couple of places I'm going to go with this. First, the opposite of empathy is shame. So when a person, yes, when a person is having a hard time having empathy, the first place that I go to is, well, how much shame is showing up? Yes, we do need some help on learning how to convey empathy sometimes, and there's some tools around that. But if he has the tools and he's not doing it, then what I'm really wanting to explore what is how much shame is still showing up. How much does he beat himself up and feel like he's not enough and all that kind of stuff? Because if we if that's there, it's going to be nearly impossible for him to be able to show up for you in the way that you're wanting that. So there's some work to do around that. The other part is that it's not the attachment wound that causes the suffering. So you have a betrayal wound and it hurts, and I want to validate that it cuts deep. But what really causes us the suffering is what we've come to believe about ourselves as a result. And so when you think about that betrayal, are there things like I'm not enough? There's something wrong with me. Are there things about I can't trust him? I can't feel safe around him. Are there beliefs about I'm powerless? There's nothing that I can do. And exploring those core beliefs and all three. How much of his behavior am I internalizing and thinking it's because I wasn't enough? And can I debunk that? Can I understand that I am enough and I'm worthy and he's got his stuff and that his behavior is not a reflection on me? Do I feel safe with him? Well, no, I don't. And there's a reason, yeah, because he's not showing up. So uh he needs to work on that. And I can express my need and understand that he's not in a place where he can get that. So where else can I turn to get some safety and some trust? Are there other people in my life that I can do that with? Am I powerless? Do I have to wait for the next 30 years for him to finally go to therapy and do some stuff before things? No, I'm not powerless. There's choices that I can make for me. So when you take a look at that, tending to those core beliefs is a way of being able to heal your attachment wounds. Because at the end of the day, they're your attachment wounds. They may have been caused by somebody else, but they're yours. And so you can do a lot to heal them. It's not contingent on whether somebody else does their part. I can tend to my wounds and I can learn how to have self-compassion and I can learn how to have boundaries and those kind of things, which will help my wound, even if the other person doesn't change their behavior at all.
And I was nodding my head vigorously with all that. I put the Empowered Women's Retreat information that will be offered again in January, and that would be amazing and healing for you. But if it, so first of all, if I'm triggered, that's data for me. Like I'm not going to get the world orchestrated so that they all do exactly what I need them to do. So I'm never triggered. So if I'm triggered, something's going on for me. I shared, at the beginning of this that I had triggers. I went and got my, workbook that I did with Troy and, went, oh, I wanted to call it an abandonment wound, but it's really a rejection wound. And boy, it's not just getting poked, it's getting like somebody's got a hammer out. And you know what? I needed to do the work on it. I was thinking with Troy, like he had an issue at the hardware store and the unnamed, unbranded hardware store. And if he was waiting for somebody there to apologize and go, gosh, I'm so sorry, like that's never going to happen. Like there's no empathy there. There was zero empathy in there, And so, he did what he needed to do to take care of himself, so the gift is, it feels unfair, but the gift is that if we have triggers, we can find what works for us. He talked about phoning a friend, and I pushed and said, okay, if that phone doesn't get picked up, what do you do? And he's got a backup plan. So where do you need to go to find, the safety that you need? Because yeah, husband doesn't have the clues yet. I did put Out of the Doghouse work group. That one's coming up in December again, and that could be useful too. But these are all skills we didn't get when we were kids. Like we didn't do that. You've been married a long time. So this is not a 20-year-old that's been doing this for a bit. This is somebody, probably more my age and has these patterns, and has shame and all of those things. So it's going to take time if he's doing the work that he needs to do. If he's just stopped doing those behaviors, like yeah, don't expect change from him, but take care of you regardless of what he's doing or not doing, which right now it feels like not doing. So okay, how can my partner and I move forward in our relationship outside of our recovery, since he's in recovery for his addiction and I'm in recovery for my betrayal, while I feel everything has been tainted for the full 9 years of our relationship?
So there's three phases of healing when affairs or infidelity happens. And the first phase is the discovery phase, where we understand what happened and we have protocols for that with full disclosure and that kind of stuff. And then the second phase is understanding why it happens, not in a way of blaming, but understanding some of the patterns that were happening in the relationship and what was going on that led the partners to not be able to turn towards each other and those kind of things, and how can we show up better for each other and those kind of things. And then the third is saying goodbye to the old relationship and building a brand new relationship. So as I was reading your question, there's been a lot of pain and grief that you both have been carrying around for 9 years. And if you've gone through those other two steps, then the next step would be to say goodbye to the old marriage. And some couples actually do like a funeral. They do some kind of ritual where they're laying their old relationship to rest, and then they're doing something to inaugurate a new relationship. They put the past behind them and they figure out, how do we build something new? We're not the same people that we were. We're different. We've learned a lot. So how do we create something new? So that's what comes up for me as I'm reading that, is if you two have done that, and it seems like you have. I'm reading into some stuff, but it sounds like you've done work. It may be the right thing to say goodbye to that past and say, okay, how do we build something new together?
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Lots of grief there. But it's also like choosing to move forward. For the next question, I've been throwing some resources in, but I'm going to add Debbie McCrae. I just put the link for previously recorded. She did a great job on a two-part on grief specifically, mostly directed at partners, but there's grief for each of you with that. So that two-part webinar may be useful for you too. Okay, so for the next one, so this is a male in Canada trying to get over porn for 18 years and has needs counseling, doesn't have money to spend. Are there resources, lower cost groups? I just put a whole bunch in. So we have free drop-in groups and webinars. We've talked about that. Troy hosts the men's group on Fridays, but there's lots for each of you, both you and your partner. Low cost online work groups. I put the link in, that's on the Seeking Integrity site too. So that's where I was throwing resources in. So I'm hearing others on this website for the first time on how their partner has been affected. I'm finally making the shift to see how my partner has been affected. She isn't quite ready for couples counseling. I don't think you are either. We talk about that often, of like, you guys need to do your individual work and support. The best part though is I'm starting to take my wife's feelings into consideration. I want to be a better husband. That's great. I'm fortunate that she is still with me and does want bedroom intimacy. I suffer from poor erectile dysfunction at the moment. So
Well, we're really glad that you're here. Part of the vision that Dr. Rob had when he built what we're doing here is he wanted to be able to provide resources to people all over the world who maybe didn't have access to CSATs, who maybe didn't have access to these kind of things. So Tammy and I have been doing this for 5 years, it feels like.
yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And the different things that have happened over the 5 years and the different specialists that they bring in and the webinars and all of those things is part of that vision to help people like you. So I'm glad you found us and I hope you come back.
Yeah, and the drop-in groups, we have separate ones for male addicts. We've got a male partner one too, but we have then the females. There's a bunch of different ones for each and both of you, starting on Sunday night and going through the week, with the exception of Saturday. We don't have any on Saturdays right now, but there's a lot of options, including there's a betrayed partner drop-in group now on Friday mornings for partners of those that are porn addicts, and that can be to the best of your knowledge. It doesn't have to be, so if that's at 7:30 in the morning Pacific time, that's a new group, and I hear very good things. I'm getting positive responses, so that's another option too. Okay, Next question. What to do when my wife asks a question and before I get the answer out, she responds, assuming that what I am saying before I am able to finish my thought, which is different than her assumption?
Hmm.
That's a great question.
It is.
And that can go either way. So thank you.
Hmm. So that sounds like it's a pattern. So when things are calm, not in the moment when this is happening, when things are calm, you might want to say something like, hey, I've noticed that when you ask a question, you have an idea of what I'm going to say before I say it. And sometimes what you think I'm going to say is not what I was going to say. Can you help me understand what that behavior is all about? Can you help me understand what what's going on with you? I get that you don't really trust me, and so you might be thinking the worst case scenario to prepare yourself for the worst. But how do I have the ability to answer your question when you already have made an assumption about what I'm going to say? What can we do to not experience that so that we both can communicate differently?
So I have a couple of ideas too. Um, and Imago isn't always a great option, but in this moment, it kind of feels like, we're very intentional about, I'm going to wait to finish, I'm going to hear you, and then I'm going to tell you what I heard you say. Is that correct? And if it's, well, it's mostly correct, but it's, here's what I really, okay, I get the opportunity to clarify until I get it right, but that slows everything down. Dr. Eddie Caparucci often is saying, slow everything down. We say that a lot about stuff because it's, yeah, I know what you're going to say. I've got my whole answer. I got my defense, and honestly, I was laughing a little bit at this because it's usually the addict is being defensive and assuming they know what the person's going to say and, shutting it down. So Aaron Snow, our clinical director, has shared on the Monday night webinars, and I love this idea of the couple's journal, and it gets passed nightstand to nightstand, and you have 24 hours to or whatever, like you make it up. It doesn't have to be 15 minutes to respond thoughtfully about what you want to say, and then pass it over to the next nightstand. But to have the ability to kind of process through, and then it isn't words and I'm trying to remember, and all of those things. One more thing, we've talked before too about having, like, that's a good idea. That's a great question to bring to our planned, scheduled time together. I think 20 minutes, no more than a half an hour, but like 20 minutes, and we're going to bring up a topic. And then if you look at it as we're going to problem solve, we're smart people and we're going to problem solve on this particular thing. We're going to try one of the solutions that we come up with. And if it works, great. And if it needs to be tweaked, we're going to bring that up at the next thing. But then it's like, you're bringing it almost like a business meeting. We're going to have this conversation about it. It takes some of that emotional energy out of it, and guess what, we can use our thinking part of our brains then, because we're not going to all of the voices of negativity and shame that are problematic for us. So but yeah, I've had people who consistently like interrupt me, and I just get quiet, like and I pull away, and that's not who I want to be. But it's also, it shuts down the conversation. So I always think, what is the goal? If the goal is to continue to connect, how can we, and this is, let's problem solve together, come up with a different plan.
I love it.
Oh, that has already been done. So apparently, I don't know which piece of that, but that's already been done. So, okay. I don't actually hear my judge or critic in my head. It's more like these negative beliefs are just a felt sense of truth. That makes it harder for me to catch or identify those beliefs. Any suggestions on how to dig deeper into these when they aren't caught conscious thoughts?
Yeah. So let me okay. That's not the greatest one, but it works. So if you look at there we go. So the finding peace model the attachment wounds are right here, and then the core beliefs are right there. And the core beliefs, I love how you say that, it is a felt sense, right? The core beliefs have been developed over the course of our lives as the wounds have been made, right? So if I have an abandonment wound and I'm wondering, like, why did my birth mother give me up and that kind of stuff, the core belief is, well, because I don't really matter, I'm not important. And then that gets woven into all of my life experiences. So then whenever one of my wounds get hit, that's the automatic felt sense, I don't really matter, that kind of stuff. And it happens like that. So the shame comes a bit later. And then when we talk about like the judge or the martyr or those kind of things, that comes later, and it gives us some vocabulary to maybe give a voice to that felt sense. So that's why they're separate from each other. The core beliefs and the shame is separate. It gives me a voice of the felt sense. So when you're feeling that in your body, and that's part of the work, is, well, can you, if we were going to take that felt sense out and we were going to imagine what that entity looked like and what it would be saying to us, now I have a little bit of a gap between me and that that message, and I can start to separate myself a little bit about, well, what's going on, and is that true, and where's that coming from, and how long have I believed that for myself. So that's one of the ways to do it. Another way to do it is doing things like EMDR or breath work, where we let your brain or your body do the work without having to do it from a CBT kind of perspective, right? So if you have somebody who knows how to do trauma informed breath work, that's a way of releasing some of this felt sense stuff at a cellular level without your body having even vocabulary to talk about it. EMDR is very similar, where we have an event, where does that felt sense show up? And then let's process that and see if there's a way to be able to change that felt sense. But I love how you describe that, because yeah, when it's automatic, it's right there in our body. So then we just use these tools as a way of maybe putting words to the felt sense, if that makes sense.
So do you have time for one more?
Sure.
Okay, this is a continuation about the limerence. He does not identify himself as an addict, does not believe he needs a sponsor or accountability partner. He is seeing a therapist to work on his anxiety and self-esteem issues, talk therapy. And when I suggest a CSAT therapist might be a better fit, he accuses me of controlling his healing. How do I approach him so I can be open to a different path without him feeling I am controlling?
So this is the one where they were going, this has been going on for several years, I think.
Yeah, this is the where's the limerence one?
It was one of the very first ones.
Uh yeah. So let's yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. I don't get, I don't need you to believe that you're an addict or not. If you don't want to believe you're an addict, that's fine. But can you take a look at how your behavior is impacting our relationship? I think it's helpful, especially in the 12 step, to be able to own that my behaviors have caused problems. But to me, that's all shame right there. Of, don't tell me how to, don't, you're trying to control me. I don't want to own that I am an addict. Like, to me, that all conveys, like, I don't want to accept that there's something wrong with me, and I don't want to accept that's going on. So I'm just going to work on helping me feel better about myself, and I'm not going to take ownership of my behavior. And so the challenge I have with that is, if I can't take ownership of my behavior, this is why we have a step 4, um, taking a fearless moral inventory of my defects and the challenges that I have. If I can't do that and I can't take ownership for how my behavior impacts other people, well, good luck on having a healthy relationship. So I'm sad for you, because I'm sad with you, not for you. I'm sad with you because what I'm hearing is there's a ton of resistance to wanting to do any kind of work that's going to build the relationship, which means that you're going to feel very alone. So hopefully you can reach out to some of the resources that are available to you for support for you, and to not internalize this, and to know that this is not about you. This is about his resistance and whatever is going on with him.
So, two quick things. Dr. Rob does a one-time 2-hour expert consultation with couples that are stuck. He's really good. And when couples are going like, hey, like we're floundering around, this is not working, let's get an expert to help. He does these with couples around the world via Zoom. You can email me, tami@seekingintegrity.com. That might be useful for you, validating for you as a partner. But also boundaries, healthy boundaries for you are not control. And regardless of what someone is saying, and we won't use the addict word, but the person that's doing behaviors that have been problematic, but at the end of the day, like that person is not doing things that will build trust. I often say too, I know why people that have been using compulsive behaviors want to go to a nice talk therapist, because they're going to talk to us about our anxiety and all those other things. And guess what? Someone who's doing addiction recovery, it's accountability. It's like it's shifting things. It isn't just like, well, let's talk about, all of those, I like talk about your week and how your partner's being mean to you and all those things. Yeah, I honestly, it's kind of a red flag if someone loves their therapist and feels, like they're so nice to them all the time. To me, that's almost a red flag. Like I want them to respect their therapist, absolutely. But if there's not any accountability, if there's not any shift forward, you're going to be stuck. But you partner don't have to be stuck. Healthy boundaries for you. I'm extra motivated to go get that boundaries course for January set up and post it on our website, because it's so helpful. Internal boundaries and external boundaries, like we all need them. And unfortunately for partners, I hear that kind of stuff. Well, you're trying to control my healing. No, I'm trying to take care of myself, and our relationship is in crisis, like completely different message. So, okay. Thanks everyone. Thank you, Troy. So December, Troy will be back on the 3rd week of the month, and watch the schedule with the holidays. Lots of things are different. And then Dr. Eddie Caparucci is tomorrow. He's going to be starting on Thursdays. He's this week, the 3rd week this month, and then he'll be the 1st week of the month on Thursdays starting in December. So I think I got that all right. So thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.